Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I sound quite impressive if you believe what Trevor's told you there. I guess the reason I'm here talking about the factors affecting performance is based on the work I really did at Norwich. So as Trevor said, I was head of sports science and medicine for the academy there. So that's looked after the well-being really of all footballers between the ages of 8 years old and 21, and then some of the reserve team players as well. And I was in charge of that department and started that department, recruited that department. So I had the doctors, I had the physios, I had the sports scientists, the strength and conditioning coaches, the diets and nutritionalists, the sports psychologists, and the performance analysts. That was my department. Now, I'm not an expert in all of those things, as you'll probably notice tonight. Some of you will know maybe more detail about some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight. But what I prided myself on in that job and ever since is to know as much as the staff that I had to look after. So I knew whether they were BSing me or not, and I also knew the right direction for the department to go in the short and long term. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, I mean, this is massive, this is huge. This topic could last a week. And hopefully by the end of the next half an hour, it doesn't feel like it's lasted a week, but it could last a week. So I've picked out things that I think are quite important, but also I guess have a bit of an interest in, and hopefully you also think they're interesting. And there'll be bits that you can take away now and bits you might want to look into in a bit more detail. And there'll be other bits that you might want to go and speak to a true expert about, okay? So to start with, no man is an island. So we've got lots of things when we're competing that are coming at us or training, from the outside, whether it's environmental factors or whether it's family life or school or our coach or our training load or our opponent that are acting on us and affecting our performance. We've also got the way we internalize those external factors. So how we respond to exercise and training, how we respond to the food and drink we eat, how we are able to make the best use of what our parents have given us. All those things are things that we can influence and manage. And both of these things, manage is the right word. So how do we cope? How do we manage those external and internal factors acting on us to get the best performance possible? And that's basically what the talk is about tonight. Some will be the external factors, some will be internal factors, but how can we manage them? How can we identify when they're causing us a problem, and what can we put into place in broad brushstrokes, not in detail, because you won't get a huge amount of detail tonight out of me, because the topic area is just too big. But what can we start to think about? The other reason it's not going to be huge amounts of detail, this is a stolen athletic performance pyramid from about 50 other different people, so I've nicked things from lots of different areas, and that's what this presentation is. It's me nicking things from the experts and from people that know a lot more about stuff than I do. But we focus a lot in the academy on these fundamental behaviours, and tonight we're not going to stray too far from there, because unless you have that foundation, unless you have those building blocks, for want of a better phrase, you're pissing in the wind, trying to add other stuff onto it if you don't have that fundamental building block. The strength and the power sessions you're doing, if you have poor movement efficiency or you're not prepared ready for the training session, is not going to give you the physical training adaptation that you would like, or as good a training adaptation as you would like, if compared to if you're moving really well. You're really prepared for your session because you've slept properly, you've eaten properly, you've drunk properly, and all the rest of it. Okay? So we're not going to stray too far away from that. But as we're working through that pyramid, so as we're improving and as we're developing our physical attributes and our sport-specific skills and our strategy and training and competitions, we'll always have these external factors pushing against us. So how are we managing them? How are we coping against them? And we'll always have these things going on inside us that will either help us to perform better or that will harm our performance. So how are we coping? How are we managing them? And as I say, that's what this talk is about tonight. So in the context or analogy of baking a cake, this first little bit is understanding how to make a nice cake, what a good recipe looks like. And those movement skills, being ready, being recovered, eating the right things, having the right thoughts in your head, they're all what you need. If you don't have them, your journey to the top is going to be a hard one. It's going to be really difficult, and you're not going to bake a particularly nice cake. Once you've got a decent recipe, then you've got to cook it, then you've got to put it in the oven, then you've got to make sure that you add things to it. Yeah, so that second level of the pyramid. And only when you've baked a good base can you start to decorate and make it look nice. I think, my personal opinion, in the work I've done across the UK, is that people are too quick to jump into 3 and 4 before they've got 1 nailed, before they've got 2 nailed. Now, you can go through them, yeah, so you don't have to wait until everything's sorted in base before you move to the next one. Yeah, it's a continuum, yeah. But I think too many people try and look for the nice sports skilly type stuff, or look what I can do, before they've nailed the basics. And it's those basics, those fundamentals, and the people in the academy will remember me saying this, that will make you a champion. It's not the frills, it's not the cherry on top. Yeah, the very good players or the very good athletes are the people that do things consistently over and over and over and over. They take care of the basics on a daily basis. Once you get to the real top, yeah, the top of your pyramid, then you can start looking back and fine-tuning and tweaking things, making things even better. Your Rory McIlroy's changing the swing, Tiger Woods changing his swing, tennis players going changing their serve or changing their forehand and backhand. You can only do that when you've got a really solid foundation and really solid base. Okay, so your skill levels are at a really high level. But underpinning all of that are your natural ingredients, so what you've got to play with in the first place. And that's really where we're going to start. So there's been a lot of debate over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years of nature-nurture. We're going to start with the nature part of that debate. And if you've read The Sports Gene, great, because it's a nice antidote to Malcolm Gladwell's books and Bounce and the Talent Code and all those books that tell you that as long as you work hard, you'll be all right. Now, there's nothing wrong with that advice, but genes do play a part. Okay? And this is, as I say, a little bit of an antidote. So the first thing to draw on is height. Every sport you look at, or the vast majority of sports, there's some notable exceptions like gymnastics and synchronized swimming and diving and a few other bits and pieces. As performance levels increase, height increases. Yeah, so often the taller you are, the better your performance. But it's a little bit more complex than that, because in swimming, most people who do quite well are pretty tall, but they also have a longer torso to their legs, and they also have longer arms than their legs, and they also have bigger hands and bigger feet. And that's kind of natural selection. And when you get to the top end, more athletes will be like that. Yeah, because their center of mass is further down their body, so they stay afloat more easily. If they have long legs, then the legs are going to pull them down, and they're using their energy to stay afloat rather than propel themselves forwards. Big hands, big arms means they've got long levers to pull themselves through the water. So that's swimming. Height's important, but not just how tall you are, it's how you are that tall. I don't know if that makes sense to people, okay? And there's not a huge amount you can do about that. That's how you're born, yeah? 30% of your height is your environment. So it's the food you get, how much love you get from your parents, your support, your home environment. All right, the other 70% is look, who your parents are, who your ancestors are. Okay? So the point I guess I'm making here, and we'll look at another couple of slides, is you've got to kind of choose the right sport in some ways, and there'll be a but coming, don't worry, there is a but you kind of got to choose your sport a little bit for your body type, okay? Or the sport chooses you is another way of looking at it, okay? And at the very top level, that's the case. Basketball's another good example. We've not got any world-class basketball players who come from the Isle of Man, but it's just a nice way to illustrate a point. Basketball players also, obviously, are very tall, But there's two characteristics of their height. The first is their legs are longer than their body, so their center of mass is higher. So when they jump, it's easier for them to get higher. Okay? And the next bit is their wingspan is usually longer than their height. Because they need to reach, don't they? They need to grab things. And that's natural selection. But now recruiters in basketball are looking for people with long wingspans and people who have exceptionally long legs. Because they know that from a basketball point of view, that improves their performance. There is a but to that. Yeah? But genetics play a part, height in particular, in a lot of sports. Another thing that plays a part is your body shape. And we're all on a scale. So this is a somatotype system, and we did quite a lot of work around this at Norwich. An endomorph, it's self-explanatory, isn't it? These mesomorph characters in the middle put on muscle really, really easily. They've got this wedge shape, V shape, upper body. Me on the end here doesn't put muscle on very easily, struggles but can run. Yeah, because we're light and we've got light bones. Okay, these sumo wrestlers on the end have lots of body fat, float really, really easily, and tend to be kind of linebackers in American football or sumo wrestlers or weightlifters or something along those lines. So somatotypes is something you may have heard of and you may not know very much about. But we can plot sports by somatotype. So you can see these little scores at the bottom here. An ectomorph is a 117, mesomorph 171, endomorph 711. If you're in the middle of that chart, you're a 444. Okay, so based on anthropometric measurements, based on skin fold measurements and girths of your arms and lengths of certain bones in your body, you can get a somatotype score. And we did this with all of our kids, or all of our adults, footballers. And there's this kind of like ideal, you can see if I get somewhere around about there for footballers. The average footballer, more often than not, will be slightly mesomorph, and most of them these days will be bordering into ectomorph as well. Okay, because that body shape helps them be the best that they can be in their sport. Yeah. Now, we're not born there, but we move there as we train. So our training loads take us towards the right shape for us to play the sport that we're playing. So with good nutritional strategies, good training loads, good rest recovery and all the rest of it. We'll often find those that are predisposed to do very well at a sport will be drifting towards their end point, yeah, as they engage in that sport. So those tall people, thin, long arms, long torsos, might be swimmers anyway because they really enjoy it and actually they happen to be quite good. And then the more they swim, the more they drift towards the ideal body shape of a swimmer. Okay? But we found that we could affect the somatotype of our players with good nutritional strategies, good training strategies, and an individualized approach so we can help them bring towards an ideal football body shape. Okay? So you're not stuck there forever, but again, not just your height and not just the length of your arms or the length of the legs, but your body shape will predispose you to a sport. And if you want to be really good at a sport, then being aware of that and choosing the right sport or letting the right sport choose you is not a bad strategy. Most of you hopefully know about slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fibers. This is something you're born with, or the percentages you are born with. And we're not going to go into type 1 and type 2A, type 2B, and all the different genes that have been associated with what percentages you have. Well, these ladies on your left of the screen will have far more fast twitch muscle fibers that they can make best use of with appropriate training than the ladies here on the left of the screen who are middle distance runners. They'll still have a fair amount of fast twitch muscle fibers, nowhere near as many as them, yeah, and nowhere near, and a lot more than your marathon runners and your Ironman and ultra distance runners. So again, the way your muscles are made will predispose you to an ability. Okay, and whether you're quick or whether you can endure or whether you have speed endurance will all depend upon the proportion of muscle fibers you have in your body. And that's kind of locked in a little bit, depending upon who your parents are. Kind of. There will be a big book coming. Don't worry. There's Chrissy Wellington here, Ironman athlete. There have been up to 12 genes shown to affect endurance, so being able to have high VO2 maxes, high tidal volume, so your lungs can take a lot of air in, your heart can pump a lot of blood around your body, you can have a bigger heart, you can go longer for more efficient effort. They're there. The researchers now have found some of those genes. And guess what? The people that go on and do really well in world championships or Ironmans or ultra distance events, the ones that do really well have more of those genes than the ones that don't. Again, a bit of natural selection going on there. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So again, if you're able to run a long way for a long way in a decent amount of time without feeling too tired, you've probably got some good genes. Okay. The other thing that's kind of locked in, some personality traits. I'm looking at Mr. Peak here from last week when we were talking with Helen Nightingale. 50% of us have a happy outlook. 50% of us have a grumpy outlook. That's how we're born. Scientists have proven that. Other personality traits like introvert, extrovert have been shown to be changeable as you grow older, but also how you come out of the womb. So it's there. Be aware of it. Okay? Certain personality traits are good for some sports. Certain personality traits are good for other sports. I'm a grumpy introvert. Believe it or not. I don't talk very much when I'm not stood in front of a group of people. I don't like it. There's a massive but to all of that. It's all well and good being aware of that, yeah, and that it's important. I think it's really important to be aware of it. However, it ain't what you got, it's what you do with it. It isn't what you've got, it's what you do with it. We all have heard the saying, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And that's basically the point. Yeah? You may not be the quickest person in the world. You may not be the tallest person in the world. You may not fit the stereotype for your sport. You may not be the right body shape, ideally, for your sport. But if you're prepared to work harder, you're prepared to train more than anybody else and do all the right things and not leave any stone unturned, you'll do better than somebody that has all the right genes in alignment. This little guy, Muggsy Bogues, who's there with Jordan towering down over him, 5'3". One of the highest assisting basketball players and stealing basketball players ever in the NBA. 5'3". But he worked on other things. He had weapons, which were being able to pass the ball in different angles that the tall players couldn't cope with, being able to move around the court quicker than the taller players, being able to get at them and steal the ball, that made him valuable. Daley Thompson, just over 6 foot. Most of the people he was competing against in the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles was 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", because in the decathlon, you need big limbs, you need a lot of power. He was quick, he was fast, he was explosive, and he turned them into his weapons to win gold medal. He also trained more than anybody else. Messi, just legendary, because he's made a weapon of his skill, made a weapon of his left foot, because he just stands on his right foot. But he's trained and trained and trained to make sure that his physical stature does not hold him back. Michael Carrick, one of the slowest players in the world. However, his vision and reading of a football game make him one of the best players in the world and one of the most underrated players in England by a long, long way. And I'll very briefly say that Mr. Cavendish does not have a body type of a professional cyclist. And if he wasn't cycling, he would look very different to how he is at the moment. But because he trains so hard, because he pushes himself, because he's lucky enough probably to have a lot of type 2A and 2B fibres, fast twitch fibres, he's done something that's incredible in the world of cycling. None of them are blessed with the best genes in the world for their sport. But they've all done something truly remarkable, and there's many, many, many more examples by hard work and by making the most of what they have. I kind of run out of examples really of the amount of kids that I've come across, not just on the Isle of Man, but also at the professional sports clubs I've worked at, who are exceptionally talented, who at 14, 15, 16 you would nail on to be England internationals or Scottish internationals or whatever it may be, but who just get blown away by these kids that just come out of the blue because they're just prepared to work harder than them. Those naturally talented individuals have never really had to work very hard, and as soon as they have to, they just get blown out of the water. So as much as I'm saying, yes, your genes can help, and pick a good sport, they don't define you, okay? And there's many more examples of people who've done well despite what they have, rather than because of it. So hopefully that leaves that little section with a positive-ish message. Yeah. But that's not usually what you hear. Not many people would tell you about the genetic predispositions of sports and all the rest of it. You know, it's a very positive, happy, clappy. The harder you work, the more chance you have. Well, it's not always the case. It's a bit of both. So that's the first part. What I think I may do, rather than leaving all the questions to the end, because we're covering quite a lot, we'll have one question if anyone has a question at the end of each topic. So if you have a question about that, genes, then shout out now. If you don't, then I'll move on to the next topic. Yes?
Does that mean that the future is probably going to be that you'll be tested to see what genes you've got?
They're doing that already.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't agree with that, but that's kind of happening, yeah.
What level is that? International?
Yeah.
Even professional?
Yeah, well, there's two ways of doing it. So like your Chinese and your Russians and your people like that are doing genetic testing. But then probably even Premier League football clubs are doing, whether it's speed endurance tests, or they're doing sprint tests, or they're doing or the physical testing to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff a little bit, which is a horrible way of putting it. And I hate the professional football world. But that's almost like that genetic testing. Who are the quick ones? We'll take all of the quick ones because we can turn them into footballers. Yeah, and that's horrible because we're about to see that takes away probably 7/8 of the population. Yeah, but it's unfortunately it's kind of happening. We know the things that predispose people to be quite good at sport. So more and more sports at younger and younger ages are testing for them. I don't agree with that personally, because I think you should keep the window of opportunity open for as long as possible for as many people as possible. But professional sport, or not all clubs and not all professional sports are doing this, but quite a few are doing it already, unfortunately. It's quite sad. So relative age effect, completely off the other end of the spectrum now. Have people come across this before? Relative age effect. So I'm again going to twist it a little bit. For those that don't know, the relative age effect it's been around for a long, long time, but it was made popular in Malcolm Gladwell's book when he cited Canadian ice hockey players. And if this is a school year, what they found, or a competitive season. So Canadian ice hockey was January to December. School year, obviously September to August. There will be more older athletes in age groups selected who come from the older age groups in their school year. So the first 3 or 4 months of a school year, or 3 or 4 months of a competitive season, will have a higher proportion of athletes selected for age groups, whether that's national squads or regional squads, than the last 4 months of the year. Okay, and this is an established phenomenon, yeah, across many sports and many countries. A couple of examples of the relative age effects in action. So elite junior tennis players, you can see Q1, their season's January to December. There's many more young male tennis players in the elite junior rankings who come from those first 3 months of the year compared to those last 3 months of the year. This is the birth distribution of Europe. You can see it's pretty equal. That's the birth distribution of footballers who represented their countries in under 19, under 17 and under 21 tournaments across Europe. So the relative age effect is describing the fact that we're selecting people because they're almost a year older than the other people in their cohort. And the theory is that that's because they're physically and emotionally more advanced. So we want the best now rather than maybe the ones that are going to be the best in the future. So they're kind of saying that if we're even at 8, we had this at Norwich and Rangers, 8 years old, most of our squads were from the first 4 months of the season. So if you look at that distribution, which is pretty even, we're taking 8 months of players out of our program at 8 years old. And then it only gets worse through the ages. So we're only working with a quarter of the population at any one time. Doing the math, that means we're, you know, from a talent pool perspective, you want as big a base as possible to get as many as possible out the end of it. And what we're doing in professional sport is making our talent pool smaller. So it's no wonder we're struggling to get the end result at the end. So what people are doing are deciding, well, that's not fair on these younger ones. So we need to make sure we keep them in the system longer. So what we'll do is we'll split our years up. So we'll now have 2 age groups in each year. So we'll have a first 6 month of the year group, and they'll only play against each other. And then we'll have a second 6 month of the year group, and they'll only play or compete against each other. And that's happening now in lots of sports across the world. There's a bit of an issue with that. I haven't got a slide to prove it to you, so you'll have to trust me. But when you look at tennis, when you look at athletics, when you look at football, when you look at rugby, when you look at a lot of sports around the world, these late birthdays get through to the top. So when you look at England internationals over the last 20 years, which the sad part of me did a couple of years ago, just to see whether it's an effect worth worrying about, this all evens out. It goes back to that. Steven Gerrards of the world. They get there. They make it. Tennis is the same. When you look at the junior world rankings, you see this effect. When you look at the top 50 players in the world now, it evens out. The late birthdays get there. Same with athletics. You look at the under 17 and under 20 world championships, and then you look at the Olympic Games, medalists, it all evens out. The late birthdays get there. So my worry at the moment by splitting these up is actually you're going to get less late birthdays through. Because the reason they're getting there is because they have to work bloody hard to stay with these older kids who are more physically mature. They have to find coping strategies, they have to develop skills, they have to develop mental toughness and everything else to stay with their peers who are maybe up to 9 months, 10 months older than them. So some of the teams that are now splitting them up, and I had this conversation with the talent development manager for the English FA, I was kind of saying, look, you're putting all those late birthdays at risk of getting to the elite international level. What I'm more worried about is if you've got all these birthdays, early birthdays in your system, where are they when they get to international level? Where have they gone? You've killed them, relatively speaking. You've burnt them out. Why aren't they there? If this is an issue, we should see this at England internationals, at Belgium internationals, in the World Tennis the ATP Tour, but we don't. So where are those early birthdays? We as coaches and we as sports organisations have failed them because we've not prepared a journey for them, because we've burnt them out. And that's just started to be talked about now. Okay, so when you think of relative age effect, a lot of what you'll hear is about, we need to make sure we get more early birthdays in our squads. Oh yeah, you do. But the reason they're all getting through is because they're finding it difficult. So unless you keep making it difficult for them, you'll actually get less early birthdays through, and you'll get, less late birthdays through, and you'll still keep burning those guys out. So you actually get less athletes at the back end of it. Does that make sense to everybody if I explain that okay? All right, so why is it relevant to you, I guess? Well, be aware of it, because if you're doing really well and you're getting selected and your birthday's in January to May and you're up to the age of about 20, 21, fantastic, good, yeah. But that doesn't mean that you're going to get through, because those later birthdays are the ones that tend to be the very, very good athletes. If you're a late birthday and you're not getting selected through those age groups, or you've got children, or you're coaching players or athletes, that's fine as well. Keep persevering with them, because they might be the ones that get through in the future. And the next thing is, it's not a very good way of determining age by itself, how mature people are. The better way of doing it, we're going to talk about now. So growth and maturation. Has anyone got any questions on relative age effect before I move on? Yes?
How much of that, based on rugby squad I had, how much of that late developers coming through do you think is down to the school year? Because obviously at 4 years of age, if you're a September, October, November, December birthday,
yeah,
your relative gap, obviously even 6 months is huge.
Massive.
Compared to when you're 15, 16.
Yeah.
I had a rugby squad, and bar one person, not from their ability, not from their skills or their physical capability,
Yeah.
but their mental confidence, you could basically say September, October, May.
Yeah.
And there was basically one guy who was born after Christmas, who you would have thought was born before.
Yeah.
And all I could put it down to was 4 years old, walking in the schoolyard, being 6 months older than him.
Yeah.
And they weren't the biggest, at 15, 16.
Yeah.
But they just had that confidence that the other ones didn't seem to have, which maybe they keep, and later on when they're competing against older ones from the year ahead, and the physical difference is less, that kicks in.
Well, it's an issue, and I guess one of the reasons I've highlighted it is for the parents and the coaches in the room. You need a strategy to cope with both. Yeah, so those really confident guys, it's great to be really, really confident, but at the same time, you as a coach or a parent in the back of your head need to think, as we'll talk about in a moment, we need to give them some support, because we know when everyone catches up, they might not be the stars anymore. So how are we going to shape that journey to help them? And the other way around is these guys aren't confident at the moment. So what can we do to make sure they get their interpersonal skills up or confidence levels a little bit higher? Because we know when they do catch up physically, they're going to need that, and that's going to be really, really important to them. So unless it's about having, and we spoke about it lots at the clubs I've worked at, is having an individualised strategy for each player by taking all the information that we're going to talk about tonight into consideration to make sure they're getting the right thing at the right time for the right person. Yeah, and if you're seeing that and you're noticing it, first off, brilliant, because a lot of coaches don't, in my experience. They don't. They just shout at the players, or they ball them out, or they they say, oh, they're not good enough, let's get rid of them and bring somebody else in. But then once you've noticed it, it's, well, how to put a strategy in place then to help them. Yeah. Because they might be the stars, they might get through, they might not, but I guess as a coach, your job is to help them enjoy themselves first and then see where they get to after that. Good, okay. So growth and maturation, how am I doing for time? Not bad. So what tends to happen when we grow? So I probably should have said at the start, some of this information is for the younger athletes amongst us. Some of this information is for the parents and some for the coaches. So this is a little bit more focused towards the adolescent kind of athlete. But we always see them, as they grow, decrease in strength in certain muscle groups and decrease their flexibility. Okay, that happens. They decrease their coordination because their limbs grow quicker than their muscles, so they don't have the requisite strength and motor skills and proprioception to stand on one leg as effectively as they did. Okay. They get tired, more tired than usual, because their body is using energy to grow as well as do physical activity. I think I mentioned at the last academy workshop, we saw all of our players grow during Easter breaks and school holidays or summer holidays. None of them grew very much during the season because they were spending all their energy coping with the physical activity we were putting them under. And then as soon as they had a week's break, 2 weeks break, 3 weeks break, suddenly they shot up 3 or 4 centimetres. Okay, so they're physically tired all the time. They're tired from growing, and then they're tired from school, and then they're tired from homework, tired from socialising, tired from other activities. Okay, because a lot's going on in their body. They're actually changing into a different person, a completely different person, which is why you get that as well. So again, from a coach's point of view, a parent's point, and an athlete's point of view, it's important to understand that that's normal, that happens. For that decreased flexibility in boys, it's usually hamstrings and hips and thoracic spine, from my experience. So suddenly they can't twist as much, suddenly they can't get their knees as close to their chest, and they can't touch their toes. For girls, it tends to be the knees start to go in a little bit as the pelvis gets a little bit wider. Yeah. And gets maybe not a stiff lumbar back, but a sore low back because they start to arch a little bit more through the back. Training load will exacerbate that, so the more training they do, the worse that will be. I've not met a young athlete yet who is training in a professional football club that doesn't have sleep or nutritional deficits. So that means they're not getting enough energy in, and they're not sleeping long enough to recover. Yet to meet one. And I'd be very surprised if the academy athletes and the Institute of Sport athletes are not sleep and nutritionally deficit as well. And a lot of the other athletes, young athletes on the Isle of Man. Because they're not doing the second part of the presentation well enough to recover between school and training sessions and competitions and homework and social activities and family life and all the rest of it. And we'll see in a moment how that impacts upon performance levels. I've seen a fair number that are in completely depleted states, who just have no energy, who have no sparkle in their eyes anymore. And we'll all know athletes like that we've come across, and they drift in and out of it sometimes. But it's what, having worked with young athletes for many, many years, it's one of my big bugbears, and probably one of the reasons I'm bringing it up. Is it as parents or as coaches, if we don't manage this, it's not just through a growth spurt, but it's through their whole training process. It's no wonder that we've got grumpy, tired teenagers, because they're not eating enough, they're not sleeping enough, and they're doing too much. There's a but to that as well, which we'll come to. So how do we manage that? Because that's all well and good, that's quite a depressing picture, but how do we manage that? Be aware of peak height velocity. Hopefully most of the coaches know about peak height velocity. This is where you go through your maximal growth spurt. Most people, it happens between the ages of 12 and 14. You can grow up to 8 centimetres in 6 months. And this is where all that overload into the system, where you get lots of the tiredness and mood swings and the decreased flexibility and decreased strength really start to show its ugly head. That's a massive time of injury risk, as we'll see in a moment. Okay. And as a physiotherapist, you might not be too surprised that I'm quite big on injury and preventing injury. But hopefully I'll explain why that's important, because I like to see things. I'm not a physio who likes to treat stuff, which sounds a little bit weird. I don't want to deal with the problem when it's happened. I want to prevent it, and I want to make you as good as you can be at either end of that spectrum. So that's why I kind of am into all of this sort of stuff. The treatment of an injury doesn't really interest me or excite me these days. The other thing to be aware of is the peak weight velocity. So about 6 months or up to 6 months after you've grown the most, you'll start to put a bit of weight on. And for boys and girls, that's a good time to start developing a little bit of muscle mass if you need to. Okay, so once you've grown, so that's why another reason why knowing when they're growing and when peak height velocity is occurring, you can pretty much be sure that 3 to 6 months after that you can start putting a little bit of muscle mass down if it's required for your sport and if you've done enough training up to that point to deserve to do that. So we need to look at their training loads. So another way to manage it. Again, with young athletes, we certainly didn't do this very well in the professional world. Certainly in the UK in professional sport, what they attempt to do is they take over the life of the kid. So they know exactly what they're doing all the time. And all the training load comes from the football club, because they're not allowed to do school sports and they're not allowed to do school PE, and they don't live at home anymore. So they don't go and play out with their mates. Yeah, so we kind of managed their load because we were the only ones that were putting load into them. And I disagree with all of that, what I've just said, by the way, but that's just kind of how it's going in professional football. However, on the Isle of Man, when you're looking at your training load, you've got your training load for your sport, you've got a training load for your second sport, you've got your school PE, you've got your school competitions. Load also comes from school work, load also comes from exams, load also comes from your mum and dad telling you to tidy your room, from your mates wanting to go out and play, from your mates wanting to go out and socialise. That's load on your body. So when you break it down and you look at what young athletes do in a week and compare it to what a professional athlete will do in their week, it's night and day. The professional athletes will do far less than what we're asking most of our 11 to 17-year-olds to do, or 18-year-olds to do, on a body that's developing and growing, or trying to, yeah, if we let it. So understanding what they're doing is really, really important to make sure that we're not overloading them. So you've got to manage that and plan that. So if they are growing lots, or they are really tired, or they are really, really moody, there's probably a reason for that. So let's either emphasize different parts of the training that we know they need to see them through this process, or let's cut a few things out so the quality of what they're doing remains really, really high. So we're getting some good training adaptations. Rather than using their birthday, that's one part of it, so chronological age when they're born. But we also want to know how mature they are, so their biological age, and also how long they've been training for, their training age. And by looking at those three things, you can start to understand those that are struggling and those that are coping a little bit. So your late birthday 12-year-old who is nowhere near a growth spurt, yeah, and is quite emotionally immature and has only been training for a year, will not be able to do the same level of training than there's a 12-year-old who has started to grow a little bit, okay, and has been training for 4 years and never had an injury. So why do we ask them to do the same thing? And that's the same for every age group when you go forwards. So as a coach, good practice for me would be understanding that about each of my athletes and expecting different things of different people when you have the chance to plan your sessions, but that's what a good coach does. And the other way is a parent and a coach or a sport, you can track the maturation status of an athlete. And again, this is something we did with all of our players, is look at their standing height compared to their seated height, compared to their parent height, so mum and dad height. And then you get a maturational status. So that would spit out, and I can, what I'll do is I'll put these into a PDF and I'll put a link to the websites that you can use. That spits out a predicted height, and that predicted height can be up to 4 to 6 inches either way. Yeah, but you get an idea of where they're at. And we used to put a maturational status, so we had people 70% mature in the same group as people who we pretty much knew weren't going to grow a huge amount more, against people who were like 20-25% mature. And then we can start planning their training and our expectations of them, and the expectations of the coaches who want a goalkeeper who's going to be 6'5", but we probably know he's only going to be 5'10". Yeah, because that happens as well. To make decisions and choices about players and their training loads, and I guess in some instances whether they're going to be at the club or not. But if you don't know about that, look into it a little bit more as a coach, because it really helps you if you're training young athletes to understand where they are on their journey and how you can best help them to move forward without overloading. So to summarise that, you can have an athlete that's tall and weak. So if they're going through their, or just gone through their peak height velocity, you've got to help them. Either help them get a little bit stronger, or help them by modifying their training load to help them through that process, or help them by helping them understand what's happening to them at the moment, because if you don't, they're going to break. And when I say break, they're going to get injured, or they're going to stop loving their sport and drop out, or they're going to get overreached and overtrained. You'll have your tall and strong, your physically developed kids. They're usually the ones that get selected early. The stars get all the extra coaching. But if you don't bring them back in the sense of giving them the basics, so we usually push them on a year or two, and they just, because they're strong enough to cope with it, but do they have the basic skills required for their sport to cope when they get into open age, rugby or football or athletics or swimming? And are we giving them those resilient skills to cope when everyone catches up with them? Because if we don't, they're going to fail. And then there's the guys that are late maturers, short and weak. How do we keep them engaged? Because they're more than likely going to be your stars. So when I was working at Leeds United, there was a kid called Fabian Delph. He's now an England international, plays for Manchester City. Fabian played 2 years below himself until he was 16 years of age, because he was a dot. He was tiny, but he was the best player in that academy by a mile. Unfortunately, they had a really forward-thinking academy system at that time, because when you think of it, James Milner came from them, Aaron Lennon came from them, Fabian Delph came from them, Danny Rose came from them, all within 4-year age groups. I was lucky enough to, I had nothing to do with it, but I was lucky enough to be there at the same time as them all. And the way they modified when they trained and when they played and who they played for helped those players get through to where they are at the moment. And they did that with every player. Some got through, some didn't. But those short and weak guys, by explaining to them what's going on, giving them patience, and also keeping them challenged and stimulated, keeping them in the game or the sport for as long as possible is so important, because as we've discussed in those international age groups and the top end of sport, these are the guys that tend to get there and tend to get through regardless. They can be your stars, but we get rid of them too quickly, more often than not. So just a quick one about injury prevalence. 1,000 hours of exposure. Your early maturing players, in the year that they go into their height velocity, they get half an injury for every 1,000 hours they train. The later maturing players, so those shorter and weak guys, 3.5 injuries for every 1,000 hours. And in the year of their peak height velocity, injury rates shoot up for both groups. So unless you manage that year, okay, you're really affecting the kid's chances of being a professional athlete. That's a bold statement, but the key predictor for future injury is previous injury. As soon as you've had one, you'll have another. Okay? There's very, very few elite athletes in the world that have had a big injury when they're 14, 15, 16 that have gone on to be successful. So the more we can protect people from injury, the more they can train. The more they can train, the better they perform. The more they perform, the better that performance becomes. As soon as we get injuries, we start having problems. Especially that short and weak group or the tall and weak group, they really struggle to get over it. So as a coach, you've got to be protecting your young athletes from getting injuries. Because if you're not, you're setting them up for failure later on down the line. Any questions on that? I'm aware I'm rattling along, but as I said, there's a lot of information to get through. No? Yes?
Osgood-Schlatter disease,
Yes.
Is that inevitable, or is that an overtraining?
I wouldn't say it's inevitable. At Rangers, the way the coaches coached at Rangers, they were killing players when I got there. So we had like Osgoods from 11 years old, which is unthinkable, through to 15, 16 years old. And we had lots of players in every age group getting them. And it's all down to load. So Osgoods is, for those of you who don't know, your tibial tuberosity, which is the bony bit at the front here. Your patella tendon attaches into it. And that's where you grow from. Yeah, so the shin bone gets longer from that point. And also, there's a kind of a weak link between your shin bone and your patella tendon. So the more impact and acceleration, deceleration sort of stuff you do, the more the tendon is pulling on that shin bone. So you get inflammation, you get pain, you get discomfort. And it's a load injury. It's basically your body saying you can't cope with the load that you're going through. So our 12-year-olds were training 5 times a week for 2 hours at a time and playing twice a week as well. And the coaches were wondering why they were getting injured so much. So we put some plans into place, and it's about getting tight. So the hammies get tight, the hips get tight, the thighs get tight, which means everything pulls on it even more. So we loosened everybody up, we got them a bit stronger, and they coped a little bit more with their training load. We had less Osgood-Schlatter injuries, and then they just trained longer again. So they got injured again. So Osgood's is a overload injury. It doesn't necessarily mean you're training too much. It means your body's not able to cope with the training that you're doing. Yeah, but it's not something you have to stop. You have to, I'm going to rest for 3 months. That doesn't fix it. You can go through the pain, but you need strategies in place to help you cope with the load. Does that answer your question, Andy? Cool. Sweet. Speaking of which, training load. So you've got to think of training load as a dose response, yeah? So now this is the last bit of externally sort of stuff. So training load is a dose response. A nice way, I'll nick this off a guy called Tim Gabbett, who's a New Zealand guy who works with, an Aussie guy, sorry, who works with some of the world's best sports teams. He talks about training as being something you can do too much of, yeah? So he equates it to when you've got a headache and taking paracetamol. Yeah, so your first dose of paracetamol might start to make a difference to your headache, your first tablet. Your second tablet hopefully makes a difference to your headache. Your third tablet isn't going to do anything else, yeah, so you plateau out. And then your fourth, fifth and sixth tablet is going to do damage to you because your body can't cope with that. And training is the same thing. Your first dose and your second dose, or maybe your third dose, are going to improve. And then there's a point at which you plateau. And then after that, you drop off. So again, I think a lot of athletes I see and a lot of the football clubs I've worked at, they train too much because they're plateauing or dropping off all the time. A lot of people now are talking about your minimal effective dose. So what's the least you have to do to get the best training response? Yeah. Whereas a lot of people think about what I need to do more. I've got to do more. The more training I do, the better. No, you need to do the least amount of training possible to get the best adaptation to a point. And we'll come to that in a moment. There's always buts. Okay, so minimal effective dose. And this is from 1960s. Bannister, not Roger Bannister, but Bannister, he coined performance as training minus fatigue. So the best performance you can give is using all that training you've done in a non-fatigue state. How many of our athletes are in a non-fatigue state when they perform? I know a lot of the athletes I've worked with in the past haven't been. So this, we're not going to go through, that really the super compression theory, but this is the same thing as I was saying. So this black line is your ideal response, and then you hit your next training session when you've fully recovered, but before you've dropped off too much, and after, or to make sure you recovered properly. If you don't train enough, you don't get a physical adaptation that you want, and if you train too much or the session's too hard, you can never recover sufficiently before your next session. Okay, and that's as a coach what you're playing around with all the time. Is the training stimulus enough to get the best adaptation possible? And then am I training again at the best time possible to get the next best adaptation? Or am I constantly hitting them? They're fatigued all the time and they stay fatigued. Or have I done a really good session, but I hit them with the second session before they've recovered properly? And that's what planning and periodizing your training program and your coaching program. So whether you train too much or don't train enough, you'll get the same outcome. Training protects you from injury. The harder you can train over time, the less likely you are to get injured. So hard training sessions really matter. As we'll see in a minute, it's how you get to those hard training sessions that's the most important part. If you're training too hard, as I've said before, you're not training enough, you'll plateau or drop off. Okay, and as a coach or an athlete, you've got to think about, am I struggling to improve further, or have my performance levels dropped off? Sometimes you want that to happen as a coach, yeah? You want to push them, you want to take them to the edge, you want them to feel really fatigued and then do a session in that fatigue state, because that might be where they have to go to in a competition. But that's a strategy you're using, not the norm. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment as well. So as I say here, high training loads improve performance and minimize injury risk, but you've got to get there safely. Often we use the 10% rule. So a weekly increase in training volume, whether that's mileage, whether that's kind of heart rate zones or whatever you want to use, increasing it 10% each week. It used to be just a rule of thumb. Now in research, they're starting to prove that it is pretty robust. And if you're hitting people at 15 and 20% increases on a weekly basis, they're going to break. They're either going to get injured or performance levels are going to decrease. The new one that's coming out, and I'll be interested, has anyone heard of the acute chronic workload ratio? Has anyone come across that yet? This is really nice. And if you've got a bit of time and your sport allows it in the sense of it's easy to record, then I would suggest as a coach you start thinking about acute chronic workload ratios as a way of measuring how much your athletes are doing and whether they're appropriate or not. And this is work from a guy called Tim Gabbett, and he's starting to think about a ratio between 0.8 and 1.3 is a potential sweet spot where you get the most training adaptation with the least likelihood of injury risk. Now I'm going to explain what that is now. And that's a bit of a messy slide. I understand that, but this is his research. So if you think your acute workload is over a week, so how much exercise am I doing in a week? Now that might be mileage, as I say. It might be distance swum. Yeah, it might be RPE, so rate of perceived exertion after each session on a scale of 0 to 10. How what that workload is for you as a coach or you as an athlete to decide upon. And that's a week's worth. All right, and you add them all up or you multiply them or you do whatever you want. It's an arbitrary figure. It's an absolute figure. So that left-hand side of the graph is a unit that you decide based on what you're monitoring. Okay, then the chronic workload, they've got 3 weeks here, but it's ideally a 4-week cycle. Okay, so you add all your 1 weeks up at the end of 4 weeks and then you average them out. And that becomes your chronic workload. Okay, and the ratio is simply week 5 against your 4-week average. Okay, and then when you go into week 5, then you spit out the first week, and week 5, week 2 to week 5 becomes your chronic workload. Okay, and then when you get to week 6, you spit out week 2, and week 3 to week 6 becomes your chronic workload. So every time you add a week, you still stay in your 4-week cycles, and the week that you're currently doing becomes compared against your average over the 4 weeks. And that's your acute chronic workload. Does that make sense? Because that don't make sense to me, does it? So take week 1. Okay. Take week 1 and you measure your RPE. So say you've done 3 sessions over the week and your RPE is 10 for each session. So your acute workload for that week is 30. Okay. You come to week 2 and you've done 4 sessions and your acute workload adds up to 40. And you do that each week until you've hit 4 weeks and then you average them out. And maybe your average comes in at 35. Then when you get to week 5, you have a 50 week and you're comparing that against the average of 35. Yeah, and then you use that 50 then to make a new average. Okay, and you can plot it on the graph like this. And the research that Tim's saying is if your acute workload is double what you're doing on average throughout a season, so your 1 week workload is double what you're doing throughout a season, you're going to increase your risk of injury and decrease your performance adaptation. In the same way that if it's half your running average, you're going to increase your risk of injury and decrease your performance adaptation. Whereas if you're round about 0.8 to 0.3, when you work it out, you're in a decent spot. So you're going to get the best performance adaptations and the least likelihood of an injury. All right? And when I do the docs for Trev, I'll give a few examples so you can send it out, because I could spend half an hour trying to explain that a little bit more. But just think about comparing what you're doing now to what you've done over the last 4 weeks. Yeah? And it shouldn't be too far away. If it is, you better have a blooming good reason for it, and you better take account of it in the next few weeks. Otherwise, you're setting them up for an issue. And that's a really nice way to monitor load. And you could use number of training hours in a week, as I say, the mileage covered, the distance swum, the rate of perceived exertions, the times they've run, whatever it is. All right? Wonderful. Quickly moving on to what happens if you do overload them. And again, I mentioned this just in case coaches are working with athletes they're worried about, or parents have kids they're worried about. Overreaching is the stage before overtraining. And because of all the demands that athletes have on them, especially young athletes, but adult athletes as well, with regard to the amount of training they're trying to do, added into their work day, family pressures at home, not sleeping very well because of young kids, it's quite easy to get into this overreaching sort of state. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but a nice way of monitoring it is just your resting heart rate when you wake up. If you're a fairly serious athlete, then you should know what your resting heart rate is. And if you've got a raised heart rate of above 6 beats a minute consistently over a few days period, then you're overreaching. You're getting into an overtrained state. that happens for a few weeks and you become in an overtrained state, and then the stakes are raised dramatically because only a period of rest and appropriate intervention is going to get you back where you want to be. So it's really important that you start to recognize these signs of overreaching in your athletes and in yourselves, because as soon as you get there, you're not getting the training adaptations you want. You're taking yourself into places you don't really want to be, and the likelihood of you being able to perform long term are dropping off a cliff, really. So how to prevent overreaching and overtraining? Well, using that acute chronic workload ratio is a nice one, or just using the 10% rule is a good one. Monitoring your athletes, doing both of those things, but there's another way. Just asking them how they are, which you probably all do. How's your day been? How do you feel? Got any soreness? You achy after the last session? Do you feel well in yourself? Are you happy? Yeah? They're the basis of a well-being questionnaire that we used to use with all of our players. And as a coach, you could give them well-being questionnaires. As a parent, you could give them well-being questionnaires. But essentially, it's how you're feeling. How are you? Did you sleep well last night? Yeah, a bit tired or not? Are you okay? And based on those responses, as long as the athletes are truthful with what they're saying and they're not trying to manipulate you to get an easy session, then you can monitor what you do with them. You can individualize your training load. Make training enjoyable. Don't hammer out the same sessions all the time, because that will induce some mental stress and fatigue. And as far as athletes, the actions there is adjust training load and stimulus, okay? From an athlete's point of view, it's your responsibility to think about yourself. It's not just your coach's responsibility. So how am I feeling? Have I been sleeping well the last few days? Am I my usual bubbly self, or am I like me, my usual grumpy self? Yeah, is everything okay? And if it's not, you've got a responsibility to tell your coach and talk to your coach, and it's their responsibility then to do something about it alongside you. But you also have to accept that sometimes working hard when you're fatigued is not a good idea. There are times when it's a very good idea, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but most of the time it's not a good idea, especially if you're fatigued for a long period of time. Then you're going to push people into overtraining, which, as I said, isn't a good place to be. So, moving on. So what are we looking for when we train? Well, we're looking for an adaptation, but in order to train, in order to get the adaptation we want, we need to do an appropriate session. This may seem ridiculous, but if you want to run fast, then run as fast as you can. When you've got to, because that's the only way you can run fast. If you want to be strong, lift as heavy weights as you can. If you want to be explosive, do as much explosive training as you can maximally. So the best you can do it. Because if you're not doing it the best you can do it, you're not going to get the best response you can get. So for the younger athletes out there, or anybody out there as an athlete, you've got to do the best you can. Otherwise, you're not going to get the appropriate response. You're not going to improve as quickly as you think your training should help you to do. It'll take you longer to get there if it's a half-hour session every time you do it. Similarly for the coaches, if you want quick players or you want quick athletes, they've got to run quick, and they've got to run quick regularly, because if they're not going to build enough fast twitch muscle fibers for them to do it. That sounds daft, but in all the years I've been working in professional sport, I don't see that. I don't see the session being as good as it can be, whether it's because of the way the coach has planned it or the way the athletes are executing it. And I think all of our athletes could get better quicker if they nail that. However, when you do that, you use a lot of energy, you damage your muscles and your soft tissue, you create stress to all your body's systems, and you produce something that's called a catabolic state. A catabolic state is basically, think of fight or flight. Yeah, so you're running away from something, you're scared. So you've got lots of cortisol, a hormone called cortisol in your body, lots of adrenaline. And those being in your system for long periods of time are not a good thing. But that's what happens after you exercise, especially if it's maximal exercise. But to get the training adaptations the session you put in really deserves, you've got to get out of that state as quickly as you possibly can. Because that's a damaging state. Cortisol damages muscle. It doesn't help it recover. It makes it worse. Adrenaline stops your body from recovering because it's on edge all the time. And you've got about a 1 to 3 hour window to reverse that process. Otherwise, you stay in a stressy, catabolic state. Another problem with the athletes I've worked with is they will do their training session, they'll go home and then they'll play on the Xbox or the PlayStation and they'll play shoot 'em like fighting games, staying on edge for another 3 hours, maintaining that catabolic state and never recovering from the session that they've done. And they do that every day. Or they go home and do their homework that they're stressing about getting done for the next day, or their marking or the project they have to do for work, and they never come out of that catabolic state. So their body's always on edge and their body's never recovering properly because they don't give it the opportunity to do so. So the next bit of this talk is about the things you can do to enter in to an anabolic state, which is recovery and regeneration as quickly as you can. Because if you get there quickly, you get the training adaptations and you're ready for the next session to work maximally in your next session to get the best training adaptations you can. I see a lot of athletes on and off island that don't make the progress they can because they never recover properly from the previous session on a long-term basis. There are times when you don't have to recover because that's part of the training program, because you need to go there in competition. But that's not a long-term solution. That's not how you should train long-term. And I see a lot of people doing that for months and years, and they wonder why they can't quite get the performance gains all their hard work is putting in, it should be giving them. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sleep. Is there any questions based on what I've said so far? I've just gone on quite quick. Everyone all right? I'm conscious of time. Sleep is massive. Like the biggest thing you can do to improve your performance now, athletically or at work or at school, is sleep. Costs you nothing. But we often think in society we'll neglect our sleep, we'll nick another hour or two because I've got too much to do. Whereas it's the other way around. The more you sleep, the more you'll be able to do with better quality. And just a bit of sleep deficit or debt over 14 days decreases our cardiovascular performance, our ability for our heart and lungs to pump blood around our body by 11%. That's just 14 days of not quite getting enough sleep. It stops or slows down our body's metabolism of glucose, our energy source, by 30 to 40%. It increases our levels of cortisol, that bad hormone that comes after we train. So even without training, we don't sleep, we get elevated levels of cortisol. Train, not sleep, then those cortisol levels go through the roof and we can't recover properly. And we can't grow. So no wonder none of my kids used to grow in season. It also decreases the levels of information you can process quicker than the physical issues. So after 7 days of sleep deficit, your mental functioning, your performance, your memory, decision-making, reaction, all start to go. And you get worsening emotional response. Whether that's controlling your decisions, should I eat this or shouldn't I eat this? Should I play that shot, shouldn't I play that shot? Coping with setbacks and coping with pressure and fatigue. That's a lot. But I think most of our athletes are not maximising the potential of sleep and are in somewhere close to this. So how much is enough? 7 to 9 hours for most of us in here, 8 to 10 for the younger ones. But don't think of it as blocks of hours, think of it as 90-minute cycles. Okay, so you've got 5 stages of sleep. First stage is meaningless, really, doesn't do very much. Second stage is for our alertness and wakefulness. Okay, but you have to go through stage 1 to get to stage 2. And you have to go through stage 2 to get to stage 3 and 4, which are recovery and regeneration. So they help our body and our muscles and our mind recover from the day's activities. Then the final stage, stage 5, helps with our memory and cognitive functioning and retrieval of information. So unless you go through all 5 stages 4 or 5 times a night, and each of those 5 stages take 90 minutes, then you're in sleep deficit or sleep deprived. If you wake up a lot, you're constantly going in stage 1 and 2. You never get to 3 and 4 or 5 because you're in that light stage of sleep a lot. Yeah? So 4 or 5 90-minute cycles every 24 hours to have an appropriate amount of sleep to recover properly from your activities. Now, if you're doing lots of activities, lots of physical activity, lots of mentally challenging work through the day, you might need an extra 90-minute cycle to get you where you need to be to perform the best you can. So just to highlight a couple of things, as I said, your growth hormone is released through stages 3 and 4. So unless you get 4 to 6 cycles of stage 3 and 4, then you're not going to recover properly. Also 3 and 4, that inflammatory response, or it dampens down it. So you're more likely to get ill. You're less accurate with your cognitive performance. It only takes less than 7 hours sleep for that to manifest itself. First night, less than 7 hours sleep, your brain will be working less efficiently. Those of you that got exams coming up, bear that in mind. Recent evidence suggests most athletes sleep less than 8 hours a night. Most of us sleep less than 8 hours a night. It's a huge, huge area. It's I would call a hidden performance enhancer if you can get it right. Another thing to quickly bear in mind, when's the best time to train for you? And you don't always have a say in that, but they call it owls and larks, or larks and owls. If you were not pushed, or your natural get up time or wake up time, larks around about 7 a.m. in bed no later than 11, and owls up later and would happily go to bed after midnight. And this research suggests that your better performance for larks will happen around about midday. The better performance for owls will happen in the early evening. So if you need to do a maximum session, your best you possibly can, to get the right training adaptation, think about whether you're an owl or a lark, because that will make a little bit of difference. So a quick one, how can you tell if I had enough sleep? Because there's a small percentage of the population that can survive off 4 or 5 hours a night, so 2 or 3 cycles of sleep a night. There's another small percentage of the population that need 7 or 8 cycles of sleep a night. There's another percentage called teenagers that need about 12 or 11 cycles of sleep a night. But very quick questionnaire, do you need an alarm clock? Do you fall asleep within 5 minutes? Blah, 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 blah. Answer yes to any or all of those, and you're in a sleep deprived or depleted state. Some people using their watches and phones monitor their sleep that way. I don't like that idea because of the Wi-Fi and the magnetic waves that are coming and being emitted from your phone. You have to have your phone really close to you, under your pillow or by your bed, and the way you move will affect the readings, and they're not most reliable things in the world. The questionnaire is actually probably more reliable than your phone. Or you can use heart rate variability monitoring over a 72-hour cycle for those of you that are serious about it. And there's my little heart rate assessment over a 24-hour cycle. Everything in green is me relaxing and my heart rate variability an appropriate level for me to recover. Everything in red is me stressed. Now, I don't feel stressed, but it's my body in a stressful state, a stressful place, and I'm not recovering. I'm making everything worse. The circle is my sleep time, and this is a pattern for me. I go to bed at night, think about my next day ahead, plan it in my head, and then eventually I go to sleep. All that red is me planning my next day in my head. Not a good way to go to sleep. I go to sleep stressed, although I don't feel it. I think I'm doing quite a good thing. And then all the green is me sorting myself out after that. And the higher the line, the better the response. Yeah, the more good it's doing me. And that's one way of looking at it. Just so as you know, it's out there. So how can you get more sleep? Probably the most important thing. Consistent sleep routines, bed at the same time, getting up at the same time, avoiding caffeine, food too late, alcohol. Don't use your tablet or your TV a couple of hours before bed. I'm ridiculous, I say, I know, but stops the production of something called melatonin or decreases the level of production by 22%. So it takes you longer to get to stage 3 and 4 sleep if you use your tablet or your iPhone before you go to bed. Simple way of improving your night's sleep. Naps are the way of making it up though. Seriously. If you're not sleeping very well at night, nap. Nap. Have no more than 30 minutes. 15 to 20 is ideal. Because 15 to 20 gets you to stage 2. So remember, stage 2 is alertness and wakefulness and energy. So if you have 15, 20 minutes, make sure it's really no longer than half an hour, because if you go into half an hour, you go into your deep stage 3 sleep, and then you wake up groggy with no energy. But 15, 20 minutes up to half an hour helps to do all those things. And helps to mitigate some of the problems you're having by not sleeping 7 hours or not sleeping 8 hours or having your 5 90-minute cycles. The best bit, though, is you get to have a coffee before you have a nap, not for the kids, for the adults. Because you wake up even more alert. If we could get every employer in the Isle of Man to allow their staff to do that, productivity and quality of work will go through the roof. As an athlete or a schoolie, if you get an opportunity to have a nap at a weekend because you're feeling tired, please do so. It's the only, we used to really encourage our kids. We actually used to do a relaxation session at the end of every training session and hope that they would go to sleep for 15 minutes because we knew that it was going to be really powerful, because especially if they were doing a session in the afternoon or the evening. Because it's just such a good way to restore your energy. Any questions on sleep? That's a 4-hour conversation, really. Yep.
Referring back to the optimal times during like max effort
Mm-hmm.
kind of sessions, is there any research on when to do like submaximal or those, you know, like the 80-20 endurance?
Yeah.
Is there any time during the endurance sessions or?
Not really. It's I guess, rather than, you could use it for your max session, but just think of it as a performance. If you want the best performance possible out of a training session, then organising it around the best times for your circadian rhythm, your body type, would be the best way of doing it. If you're learning a new skill or a new technique, then the best thing you can do after that session is have a nap. Because your brain's still working and you're reinforcing all that new stuff that you've learned by having a sleep. If you don't have a sleep, then your brain forgets about it a little bit. So if you're learning a new skill or learning new information, have a nap afterwards, because it actually helps you retain that information more and lay down the neural pathways, whether it's for memory or whether it's for your muscle pathways. hydration. We'll whiz through this, and I've got one more to do, and then that's us, for those of you hanging on for dear life. So this is pretty big as well. As I guess as a population, we probably don't drink as much as we should. But you only have to lose 2% of your body weight for your performance levels to drop off. So for a 70 kilo adult, that's between 700 and 1.4 millilitres and 1.4 litres. Anything more than 3%, and then you're getting somewhere close to an exertional heat illness, and you've got no chance. And your body temperature increases for every 1% of body weight you lose. Heart rate increases for every 1% of body weight you lose. So you burn more energy, your muscle temperatures get higher, and your lactate, the enemy of all athletes, increases without you having to do any actual exercise. So you're already in those elevated states. So from a performance level, you can't push yourself past that. Some examples from sport. Decrease in performance of up to 2% in those distances when you compete already in a dehydrated state. Endurance events over 30 degrees, a 2 to 7% body weight loss, up to 60% reduction in performance. In our climate, if you're exercising for less than 90 minutes, you can get away with losing 2% of your body weight. If you're exercising for more than 90 minutes, 2% or more, you're going to have a decrease in performance. Team sports, you've got a 5% decrease in performance when you don't drink while you're playing your sport, but no decrease in performance if you can drink. So hydrating yourself and drinking properly and appropriately, hopefully, can be seen as really important for your performance levels. And this is just a quick look at how much sweat loss you get in various sports, just to give you an idea. Swimming's difficult because it's difficult to monitor how much sweat you're losing in the water, but you'll lose more than you think. How do I know? These are some of the signs and symptoms. Hopefully most of you are familiar with them. However, if you're noticing that, you're already dehydrated, so that's not a good thing because your performance is going to be down. So how else can you check? Easy. Look at your pee. Look at your urine colour. Before you exercise, you've got to be coloured 1, 2 or 3. If you're not, you're already in a dehydrated state and your performance level is going to go or gone. You're not going to be able to perform maximally. So how to avoid it? You've got a plan. You've got to start early. 3 to 4 hours, some researchers say. You should be starting to employ a strategy, hydration strategy, which is drinking little and often. Working towards a nice urine colour before you exercise. And at 20 minutes before, have a little top up. And while you're exercising, if you can, drink regularly. And then after exercise, you've got to restore your balance. In most cases, having a carbohydrate energy drink is the best way of doing that because it helps to absorb sodium, your electrolytes, and helps to actually improve your gut's ability to absorb water into your body. So your Lucozade Sports, not your Lucozade Lights, because they don't have any sugar in it, which is your carbohydrate. But your Powerades and your Lucozades, I don't often say it, but are actually quite good post-exercise especially. However, they're not as good as something you don't need to pay quite as much for. So this is how well different drinks rehydrate you. And the bar is kind of giving how much better it is than still water, really. So still water's here, the fourth one along. So this is how well the fluid stays in your body when you drink it in a hydrated state. These are the best. Coffee's the worst. Milk. Best thing you can drink post-exercise, milk. Not just because it stays in your body better, so you've got more fluid in your body, okay, but it also helps with your building of muscle and helps to metabolize or break down protein, which is what you need to help build your muscle and grow your muscle. So milk is the best sports drink on the market. However, if you can't get your hands on milk, orange juice or flat cola are half decent as well. Not fizzy cola, flat cola. Water's still really good beforehand. You don't need much else. But afterwards, milk. How much fluid? Well, you're not going to get that information tonight. It's all individualized, really. But you can work it out yourself because you need to figure out how much sweat you're losing while you're exercising. So you take your weight before exercise, you take your weight after exercise, you add all the fluid to that you've drunk while you've been exercising, and then you take away any fluid that you've evacuated. And that gives you how much sweat you've lost, and that should be how much you drink while you're exercising. For those who are really well prepared, you should do that in hot environments, cold environments, training, competition. So you understand in every situation how much you need to drink to make sure you're hydrated to the best possible state to have the best possible performance. We did that with all of our players at Norwich. They all had the amount of fluid that they were attempting to drink during a training session. So they stayed hydrated, yeah, so normal levels of hydration as much as possible. 8 cups of water is still a good one through the day though when you're not exercising. Yeah, that's bog standard. Or 8 cups of fluid. Before I go into the next one, any questions on water or hydration? No? Wonderful. As I said at the beginning, this is all general rules of thumb. There's lots more detail to be uncovered. Those in the academy will get some detail in year 2. That's what year 2 is about. And make it individualised to you. For everybody else, either read around it further or seek to speak to an expert. So really real basics. Use carbohydrates for energy. Use protein to recover. Use fats as a source of energy sometimes, but they also help with the brain. Fibre to sort your guts out. And the micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals to help your body to work properly. And a balanced diet is always a good place to start. And the real basics to eating well for good performance are there. Eat at regular intervals. 3 meals a day probably isn't ideal for people who are training lots. 5 or 6 smaller meals a day is more beneficial, especially for younger athletes who have got school and are doing 2 or 3 effectively training sessions a day. Should be eating 5 or 6 small meals a day. That's not snacks and chocolate bars, it's 5 or 6 proper small meals a day. Maintain hydration. Don't drink alcohol if you want to perform well. But you also need to learn how to shop and plan and prepare and cook those meals, especially if you're going to go off island, the youngsters, before you can even start thinking about impacting your performance with nutrition. If you can't do any of that, forget about individualized performance nutrition. That's the basics. That's that bottom tier before you go anywhere else. Then you can start thinking about the right things to eat before I compete and train, while I'm training and competing, how I do it afterwards, what sort of food I need to eat while I'm traveling, how often. But there's no point thinking about any of that unless you start eating regularly in the first place, you're drinking regularly in the first place, and you know what good foods are and how to cook them and prepare them. And then you can start talking about how you can use nutrition to change your body shape. So remember somatotypes. Yeah, you're using nutrition appropriately, you can create a good body shape for your sport. And then, and only then, can you start thinking about, are there any supplements that I need to take over and above my normal diet? We banned all our players from taking supplements and protein shakes and all the rest of it. It's just not required if you're eating properly, most of the time. For the players who were really struggling, were going into those really fatigued and low states, we would give them extra help because they were struggling. But for the majority of people, just having a really good balanced diet is a good place to start. So a little bit of detail before I finish up. Carbs are your energy. You've got to use it. You've got to use carbs and eat carbs. There are different types of carbs. That's beyond the remit of what I'll talk about today. But carbs are good. Don't avoid them. A lot of people do, but don't. However, there are times when you're a bit older, rather than with the kids, there are times when you can train in a reduced carbohydrate state to improve your training adaptation, especially endurance runners. Go training on a low carbohydrate state, so either early in the morning before breakfast or later through the day if you've not had very much carbohydrate intake. That's good to do it every now and then because you get a better training response. All right, sometimes with the first team at Norwich, we used to have low carbohydrate days on a Monday, Tuesday, and then a Wednesday do a really hard training session, and then make sure they had lots of carbohydrate before the Saturday, because that really hard training session takes them to a place that they're not used to, but they'll probably need to be in a 90-minute match, because we're not always fully loaded with energy. So you've got to train for the worst case scenario sometimes. As we see there, making sure you've got enough vitamin D in your diet is really important to make sure you recover properly. Breakfast. Please eat it. Please eat breakfast. If you don't, you're not going to be able to perform anywhere close to your best for the next 24 hours. 5% doesn't sound very much, but 5% every day turns into a lot over a training year. And as I say, you've got to make the most of every training session. You've got to be at your best every training session to get as best response to your training as possible. Endurance athletes, those of you that, and I would class anyone on the Institute of Sport and anyone, regardless of your sport, on the academy, and anyone who trains more than 3 or 4 sessions a week as an endurance athlete, regardless of sport, because of everything else that's going on in your life. Okay? This is specific to people running longer distances and training for longer distances. But unless you're taking protein in, then you're not going to be able to recover properly after you've done your exercise. And sometimes, if you've not got enough carbohydrate and you're not taking protein in, then you're going to use your protein stores for energy. So your muscle mass is going to drop, so you're going to decrease your body weight, and then you'll use your fat stores for energy. So then your body weight's going to drop even further. So how much carbohydrate you have is key, but also how much protein you have is really key. And that's that 30 to 60 minute little window we were talking about before to turn your body from a catabolic state into an anabolic state, to turn it from a stress response to a recovery. So having that 20 to 25 grams of protein in the first hour is really important. If you're training more than twice a day, so everyone in the room, because most of us are working and training, or school and training, or double PE and 2 training sessions, you've got to have carbohydrate and protein together. You've got to eat enough of both. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to train optimally. And your muscles aren't going to be able to recover. Quick one on alcohol. Not good. If you're serious about being an athlete and doing your best in sport, do not drink alcohol, ever, until you've finished being an athlete, is my advice. It's not good. Stops you sleeping properly, stops your recovery, stops your body being able to use protein to rebuild your muscles, decreases your mental acuity, affects your bone density, increases injury risk. And that's not drinking, that's not being an alcoholic. That's just having a little bit of alcohol every week. So please, so my advice is to say don't do it if you're serious about being an athlete. Pardon? Tastes horrible as well. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I didn't drink till I was 16, and then I moved away from home. And during pre-season, one of the first nights out, against my better judgment, I drank and never looked back since. But my week became a night out on a Saturday rather than a training week. It wasn't the only reason I didn't get a longer than 1 year contract as a professional footballer. But looking back, I wish I'd never done it. All I had to say was no, I didn't want that vodka and coke. But I said yes. We're going to kind of skip through mindset, other than saying it's really important to relax, because if you don't relax, you stay in this stressful state. Relaxation, sleep is your way of entering recovery mode. And the sooner you get into recovery mode, the sooner you're ready to train next time. So as I said, we used to do visualization, we used to do contract relax stuff, we used to do stretching, yoga, Pilates at the end of every training session with our players to get them into that recovery state as quickly as possible. They all thought I was daft, but then we started integrating visualization techniques with them, and then they thought it was great because they were visualizing themselves being fantastic footballers. They went on to, actually the group that we did it with mainly went on to win the FA Youth Cup against Chelsea over 2 legs. And we did it regularly from the quarterfinals onwards. And they loved it. They were begging for us to do it because they felt so fantastic afterwards and the next day. It's such a powerful tool to use to help recover from training sessions. But if you've got a busy mind, it's quite difficult. So you've got to train, it's a training. You've got to train yourself to do it, or you need someone to walk it through with you. Quick couple of bits on performance anxiety. So these are the things that can cause it when you're under pressure, when your visualizations don't work, where you see yourself failing rather than succeeding before you go. When you're the sort of introverted personality like me that thinks too much about your performance and you overanalyze it. And sometimes having people that want you to do well makes it more difficult because it increases the stakes for you. These are some of the things that happen. You get more error prone. But basically you come into your brain rather than doing things naturally and normally. So performance should be automatic. Everything you're learning in training should just happen. If you're thinking while you're performing, you're not in what's called flow. You're not in the optimal zone. And you're more likely to choke, or you're more likely to underperform in pressurized situations. So training, for us, training always used to be the hardest thing they did in the week. Competing should be the fun, enjoyment, easy bit. Because you've given them all the tricky situations in the training, and they're ready to go, and they just go and perform. If they're having to think when they compete, they're not going to be able to perform. I've used this a lot recently. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. So how you think about yourself and the words you use are powerful and will ultimately reflect your performance. I can, I am. I can, I am. Massive, 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 massive. How you see yourself and visualize yourself and talk about yourself in your head and to other people have a massive impact on your performance, whether it's training or competition. Parents and coaches reflecting those words back in a positive way can help athletes to really come into their own and have that confidence to believe they can. And they are. If it does all get a little bit too much in competition or training, come back into the moment by breathing, by focusing on the task. Your coaches and your responsibilities, make sure you've prepared for that situation as much as possible by taking you to places you're going to competition. Some of the stuff I've spoken to people about recently, a lot in team sports, they look at like the average distance run. So in rugby league, for example, I think it's 120. So over they do look at a 2-minute period. So you tend to work for 2 minutes and then, sorry, I get that wrong. You tend to work for 20 seconds and then rest for 2 minutes. And in that 2-minute period, you'll do 120 minutes of high intensity running. So they train people for that. But actually there's times in a rugby league game where they'll run for 2 minutes non-stop and cover 600 meters high intensity running. But they don't prepare them for that, so they get injured or they can't do it very often. So what you should do to help them cope is prepare for the worst case scenario that they're going to come across in competition, physically, mentally, emotionally, and then they're ready. If you don't prepare them for the worst case scenario, they don't know what's going to happen. And in the guy that we were talking to kind of said, you're making a fool out of them when it counts as a coach. You've made a fool out of your players because you've not done what they needed you to do to help them cope when it really, really counts. But there's also a flip to that. You can use competition that isn't important as a way to prepare. Because training will only take you so far. You can't put a competition environment into a training session all of the time. So use competition, whether it's on and off island, to practice. But you go there with a practice mentality, not a competition mentality. So it's selecting the right competitions. So when you go to the big competition, you're prepared. I think sometimes we just go to the big competitions and think training's enough. It isn't always. Nearly there. Positive self-talk helps you to get a better result, improves your power output, improves the time you took to completion of activity for the same level of effort. And that's just by saying things like, I can manage my effort until the end. Being positive about your performance. Just talking to yourself in a positive way has a huge impact. Any of us that's gone for a run and halfway through you think, oh, I can't go any further. And guess what? You're not going to. Well, if you think, oh, I'm halfway round now, I can do this. Well, more than likely you will. And it sounds really daft, but the mind plays tricks on you when you're in the middle of competition or middle of a training session. And just by changing how you talk to yourself, you'll get through it and you'll turn that into a really valuable session. In the same way that when you're tired and you say stuff like, I can push through this, or I'll push through this, you've got a decreased feeling of effort and you can push yourselves harder for longer. Just by what you say to yourself in your brain. You don't have to say it out loud. That's powerful, hugely powerful. You're in control. Your body will never let you deplete all your energy stores. That's what I used to say to our players. You'll never keel over. It's your brain that's stopping you, not your body. If you talk to your brain positively, then your body will let you do it. Most people stop because their brain's telling them to, not because their body's telling them to. The very best in the world push through that. Very best in Britain push through that. Because they have this positive self-talk. Skip over that. If you're tired from work or school and your brain's a bit foggy, you're not going to perform as well. Simple as that. So power naps, relaxation, sleeping properly, eating properly, drinking properly, decreases that fatigue and you can perform. Finally, you say, last slide, take-home messages. There's loads of information there tonight. Too much, some may say, but I wanted to attempt to give you a general scope of some of the things that are out there. to consider, to think about. Even if you change one of those, so change sleep routine, you'll notice a big difference. Eat more regularly, you'll notice a big difference. Make sure you're not dehydrated and your urine's always a 1 or a 2, you'll notice a big difference. Make sure that your acute workload doesn't hit out through your chronic workload, and you'll notice a big difference. Add them all together, you'll notice amazing changes. First message, choose a sport you're suited to, or work your backside off to make sure you've got weapons to cope that set you apart from everybody else who does have the body type or a more appropriate body type. Usually, the very best, if you think of the people we had on the screen, they're not normal. They're not the normal type for that sport. They do something different to set themselves apart. Okay? That's possible. But you've got to work hard to get there. You've got to train really, really hard as consistently as possible. So no injuries. Minimal injuries, but no injuries. To consistently train hard. But you've got to work your body up to doing that slowly by 10% rule. Yeah? By making sure that, again, that acute workload doesn't hit over the chronic workload. So that's by the coach and by the athlete planning that journey ahead. So the athlete can cope. The very best in the world are able to train harder. So every session they do is harder than anybody else. You've got to push your body to places you don't want it to go. But you've got to slowly get there and get there through a gradual process. If you make too big a jump too quickly, you'll go overtrained or overreached or you'll get injured. And that long term sets you back because everyone else is still training and you've got to catch up. But you can only do that if you're sufficiently recovered from the last session that you've done, or the day you've just had, or the school you've just been at, or the work you've just done. Every now and then, and I mean it every now and then, train in a fatigue state or a mentally fatigued state, or when you've not eaten very much. And I'm looking more at the older athletes than the younger athletes here. Please, younger athletes, don't push yourselves in this way, and coaches don't push them in this way. But for the more experienced athletes, train in a state where you'll be towards the end of your competition. And you'll get better physical adaptations by doing that every now and then. But you've got to plan your recovery properly afterwards. And work as hard, if not harder, on what you do after training and before training than the training session itself. Most people neglect that. But that's the biggest thing that's going to get you the adaptations you want. And the last one, whatever is in your mind is in your body. How you think is how you act, whether it's positively or negatively, in life and in training and in competition. I think I've waffled on enough, haven't I? Does anyone have any burning questions before we all disappear? Because I know I've overrun, but anyone who's seen me talk before knows that I overrun. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
On the acute chronic workload ratio.
Yes.
If you're doing a combination of sport or activity-specific training and then plus generalised strength conditioning training, would you measure both of them separately or combined together, or does it matter?
It does matter because it's a combined, a cumulative load. It's very difficult to do. The researchers just looked at what they did in training rather than what they did throughout the day. So they was training on the pitch they looked at rather than the S&C work as well. If you use something like rated perceived exertion, so out of 10, how hard did you find that session? And you use that for every bit of the training schedule, and they were scoring 8s and 9s regularly over a 4-week period, then that would flag up an issue. Yeah, you should have a little bit of variation in the rate of perceived exertion. So if you're looking to monitor everything, I would use something like that. Otherwise, you've got very different units that you're trying to pull together. Right, yeah. Or look at them separately. Yeah, but the full picture is more important than those individual pictures, I think, in my opinion. All right. Anyone else? You want to go home? I don't blame you. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention.